Trump administration doing is fishing around for a way to deal with this problem. And that basically means getting rid of the Maduro government and taking this huge problem that we've created off the table. And you remember at first, Trump was talking about the fact that the CIA was operating inside Venezuela. And then he escalated further, and we started destroying those boats and killing innocent people on board those boats. Then he started talking about a land invasion or hinting at a land invasion. Then he said that the airspace over Venezuela was closed, and now they're seizing tankers, and they're talking about putting some form of blockade on Venezuela. All these different approaches are due to the fact that the Trump administration is unable to figure out how to deal with the Maduro government in a way that they can save face. They are in a real pickle. The administration is in a real pickle. And that's what explains what's going on with the seizing of this particular ship and the blockade that's now been announced by Trump.
What you're watching isn't a plan, it's improvisation under pressure. When covert action, seizures, threats, and blockades appear in quick succession, it usually means none of them worked. This isn't about Venezuela anymore. It's about saving face in Washington. Great powers struggle most when they can't admit failure. Escalation becomes a substitute for strategy, and once credibility matters more than outcomes, mistakes stop being corrected and start being repeated.
That has been over time. And what you see is that they're flailing. He's boxed himself into a corner. You know, when I see this case of Venezuela, for some reason, I always think of his campaign in the Middle East against, what's that small country that was lobbing missiles at Israel and in the Red Sea? The Houthis, right?
Yemen, right.
Campaign against the Houthis. You remember he said earlier this year that Joe Biden just hadn't been tough enough with the Houthis, and he was going to get tough with the Houthis, and he was going to finish them off quickly. And after a month, he quit. And he admitted that the Houthis were tough hombres, and we couldn't defeat the Houthis.
You're omitting something. $500 million later, $500 million later, he quit.
Yes, exactly. But it's just the Houthis case is another instance of where he backed himself into a corner, right? It's, you know, you're talking about unintended consequences. He thought the consequence.
This is the pattern repeating itself. Bold threats, public bravado, promises of quick victory, followed by quiet retreat. Venezuela mirrors Yemen almost perfectly. When leaders talk toughness first and think later, they box themselves into corners. Escalation replaces planning, spending replaces strategy. The result isn't strength, it's exposure, and the unintended consequences keep piling up.
I thought the consequence of attacking the Houthis would be that we would decisively defeat them quickly and cheaply. And that proved not to be the case. And this is exactly the box that he's in Venezuela. The Trump administration, and this is true of American national security elites in general, do not have a very healthy sense of the limits of what you can do with military power, or and that involves threatening to use military power, which is what you've seen pretty much up to now vis-a-vis Venezuela, or even using military power. And this goes to the case of the Houthis, right? They're just real limits to what you can do. And we constantly get ourselves into these messes thinking that we're going to be able to use military force to solve a political problem that really at heart needs a political solution, not a military solution.
This is the core illusion driving American policy. Military power is treated as a shortcut to political outcomes. The assumption is speed, dominance, and low cost. Reality imposes limits, quickly and expensively. Venezuela, like Yemen, exposes those limits. Force can disrupt, intimidate, even destroy, but it cannot resolve political problems it helped create.
Most people around the world and many people in the United States think that the Trump administration is out of control when it comes to foreign policy. It just doesn't know what it's doing. It's the gang that can't shoot straight. This applies to Ukraine. It applies to Venezuela. It applies to Iran, to the whole Palestinian issue. You know, President Trump likes to advertise the fact that he's been a great success in foreign policy, that he's shut down 8 wars, he should get a Nobel Prize. This is just not a serious argument. The guy has actually failed at almost every turn. There are hardly any cases where he's been successful. You know, you look at the Iran situation, the Israelis and the Americans are threatening to attack Iran again. I thought they told us that in June they produced a great success. They had solved the Iran problem. Well, if they had solved the Iran problem, why are we talking about attacking Iran again? Ukraine, it's obvious to almost everybody that we have not found a solution there, and this is a bad situation. It just gets worse with time. The Gaza situation, that one hasn't been shut down.
What's being described here isn't chaos, it's contradiction. Declaring victory while preparing the next confrontation is not success. If problems were solved, they wouldn't keep resurfacing. Ukraine drags on, Iran remains unresolved, Gaza burns, rhetoric substitutes for results, claims replace outcomes, and over time, credibility erodes faster than any battlefield position.
It's hard to believe that it's taken him this long to get this angry. It should have happened much earlier. These shenanigans have been going on for so long now that it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe that Putin has put up with this. You can see from his comments that he really is much angrier at the Europeans than he is at the Americans.
Right.
I think that he believes that Trump was genuinely interested in reaching some sort of peace agreement. And I think it is true that Trump was genuinely interested. It's just that Trump can't execute. And the Europeans made sure that he did not execute. The Europeans have played their hand very well, as has Zelensky, and they've thrown all sorts of monkey wrenches in the diplomatic process. And the end result is there's no deal. But Putin is really angry, as are his lieutenants, with the Europeans, and that's reflected in his calling them a bunch of piglets.
This is where diplomacy finally breaks down. Patience has limits, even in Moscow. What's striking is not Putin's anger, but where it's directed. Washington is seen as incompetent. Europe, as obstructive peace, was explored, but never executed. Process was sabotaged by allies, not enemies. And when negotiations collapse, resentment replaces restraint.
I think the Russians know from their dealings in Ukraine with the Europeans, with the Americans, and with the Ukrainians that this one has to be settled on the battlefield. I think the Russians are fully aware of that. There's not going to be any diplomatic solution to this war. It's going to be settled on the battlefield. And the Russians have very powerful incentives, as I've said numerous times, to take as much territory as possible and to make sure that Ukraine is a dysfunctional rump state so that it can't cause Russia much trouble moving forward. And I also think, and there's all sorts of evidence if you listen to what the Russians are saying, that they believe that even after you get a frozen conflict, there are going to be poisonous relations between Russia on one side and Ukraine and the West on the other. In a very important way, they're preparing for a long war. That war will not be hot all of the time. It will be a cold war for a substantial portion of the time, at least after you get a frozen conflict. But you're going to have terribly nasty relations in Europe between the Russians on one side and the Ukrainians and the Europeans on the other for a long, long time.
This is the moment when diplomacy gives way to force. Moscow no longer believes negotiations can deliver security. The war is being framed not as a crisis, but as a settlement. Territory becomes leverage, dysfunction becomes strategy. Even a ceasefire would only freeze hostility, not resolve it. What follows is not peace, but a colder, longer confrontation. Europe is preparing, knowingly or not, for a generational standoff.
Congress allocated the money. It's not clear that Trump asked for the money. As you know, Congress, in the form of Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, and others, is super hawkish on Ukraine. So I'm sure they put the money in there. And $400 million is actually not a lot of money.
Well, you're right. You're right. Under Joe Biden, we gave them $265 billion.
Yeah.
Right. There's Trump with his least favorite predecessor standing behind him, because they often argue the same things but in different words, in different terms. But this is this is cash, by the way, the 400 million to the most corrupt country in Europe. The corruption is rampant, is understood by children, by academics, by religious, by journalists, by everybody. And they're sending more cash there.
Yeah. But the really important question is whether Europe can successfully steal those Russian assets in Euroclear and give Ukraine over $100 billion to help it stay afloat for the next 2 years. That's the big issue.
This exposes how detached the conversation has become from accountability. Congress spends reflexively even when the strategy is exhausted. 400 million sounds small only because the baseline has become absurd. Cash keeps flowing to a system everyone admits is corrupt. The real gamble now is not military, it's financial. Can Europe seize assets to keep the war alive? And what happens when even that money runs out?